And we're live, Senator.
Okay. Good morning, everybody and members of the public. We have Josh Hanford here with us this morning, and we've just been chatting with him offline a little bit, telling him what we're looking for this morning. He only has 20 minutes or so, and there's been some discussion publicly about what we did on S210 and moving money from the Budget Adjustment Act to S210 and the administration's response to that, both politically and substantively. And I want to focus on the substance of it at this point, trying to understand what's in S210 now, whether that causes any problems substantively. Keep in mind, technically, we have to respond to the Appropriations Committee action, which is different than ours. And let me just refresh your memory. We put in $2 million, I think, for FY22, in addition to VHIP. The Appropriations Committee, and $10 million for FY23. The Appropriations Committee put $20 million in for FY22, which is what the administration wanted, but they wanted it in the Budget Adjustment Act. And I'm a little unclear what's going on with the revolving, the $1 million we put in for a revolving loan fund last year that hasn't gotten up and running and really doesn't have, doesn't have any history to which to borrow on like VHIP did. And in S210, we do have some guidelines and guardrails for the revolving loan fund. And I guess the way that would work is once that, if S210 passed as we passed it and as appropriation passed it as to the revolving loan fund, that program would be off and running, but I'm not sure the administration wants it to be at this point. So with that background, Senator Rahm, go ahead. I was going to say with that background, I would let Josh just go in whatever direction he wanted to in response to that. But Keisha, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the direction that you take, it's still personally, I mean, I just remember I went to the ADU meeting in Burlington, one similar to the one that we watched digitally the other day. And they went through the whole thing. And then they said, oh yeah, and by the way, they have to be owner occupied. And like half the room got up and left, because even if they're owner occupied right now, the encumbrance of that is a very challenging to think about. What if you're older and you do that? Then what if you sell your house? You know, what happens if there's a transfer of ownership? And I think the state needs to give some kind of clarity or a right of, some right of ability to, have that considered in the future by the town. I don't know, but I don't know if other states have contemplated this. It just seems like a huge barrier to thinking about doing this.
So we're gonna let you talk in a second, Josh. But I mean, this is the tension we have with a lot of these housing programs. How much you want to design the program at the legislative level, and how much you want to leave it to the administration. There are things, this may be one of them, that that we want to give direction to the folks. It's a big issue, and I know even on this committee we have divergent opinions as to whether it should be owner occupied or not. So in that case, maybe the administration, even in something like that, would want some direction from us. But so let's go forward with Josh. He has like 15 minutes, and where the administration is feeling about S210, S79, and the Budget Adjustment Act. And it's unlikely that we're going to go back to the Budget Adjustment Act at this point, because that's gone through second reading. This has gone through all the committees. So it's probably going to be, whatever happens is, at least for now, going to be housed in S210. But you could have some influence on us on what is in S210.
Okay, thank you, Senators. Good morning. For the record, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. For the record, I do need to express that the governor's preference is for the 20 million investment in VHIP to continue with the BAA, to continue the successful VHIP program, that's already brought on 251 units, half of those serving the homeless. As the goal is to bring vacant, blighted, code deficient housing stock back online and serve lower income families and those experiencing homelessness. The program has proven to be one of the most single cost-effective programs to quickly provide housing to thousands of Vermonters currently experiencing homelessness. The average public investment utilizing abundant ARPA funding is under $30,000 per housing unit, well below the cost of other multifamily housing options being fully supported by the Senate and the BAA. And including these funds in the BAA will guarantee the continuation of this program and ensure our program partners have the confidence necessary to maintain and increase staff to administer the program. Delaying appropriations of these funds could jeopardize program efficiencies we have achieved and results in our program partners winding down their existing program due to budget uncertainties, significantly putting off the date these units could be completed and serve our most vulnerable. So, it's concerning that it was removed, could unnecessarily jeopardize the creation of over 500 homes for the most vulnerable Vermonters among us.
All right,
With that,
Josh, let me interrupt just, and folks can ask questions as we go, but while we're on certain points, let me just ask the question here. If you assume that S210 gets to the governor, let's say 6 weeks from now, as opposed to 2 weeks from now in budget adjustment, what is the downside? I'm just trying to understand the flow of money and applications presently. It didn't sound to me like you, with the 5 million you got last year, that you're on the precipice of denying projects out in the community. Right.
That's accurate, Senator. I can't say that 2 weeks or 6 weeks is going to stop projects in its tracks. What I'm concerned about is the entirety of S210 ultimately being supported, what else is in there, and what that does for the partners trying to plan ahead, and all that can go wrong on that. It just feels like it's putting the hope of vulnerable folks and the homes that could be worked on in jeopardy. With that, I can give you some of the concerns right now that are in the language in S210 around VHIP that I don't think have been fully considered. I don't agree that there's no policy on VHIP. We're following the rule that was passed 2 years ago of VHIP. We've sent all the grant documents, the parameters, the housing covenants, the guidelines, the application. It's all out there, and we haven't heard any feedback that this is not following the intent. What S210 has right now, which is problematic, is old language that talks about a 10-year deferred loan, which we can't use with ARPA. Right now we're doing grants with ARPA. So that is an example of, legislature creating sort of very specific program parameters that run counter to the funding requirements of certain federal funds we get, that, as I said, in the department, just since I've been there, have managed over $100 million of federal funds that the legislature has authorized the acceptance of those funds. That's it. We've developed the program parameters, the guidelines, the specifics, the maximums to adhere to the federal policies and provide the best public benefit, with reports available and audits and so forth. And I feel that that's what we've done with VHIP so far. And as we shifted to the ARPA grant last year with the 5 million, our parameters right now took into account that we need to do just grants. It's just serving the homeless. So that is in line with what currently S210 says, is that if you're serving homeless only, it can be a grant. But S210 now says if it's going to be non-homeless families, it's supposed to be a 10-year loan. We can't do 10-year loans with ARPA. And we really didn't have discussions about that as it's moved forward. And so having the money in the BAA would allow us to continue to operate and move these ARPA funds to serve families in desperate need. That's one example that we would need to change. I think another would be if we want to serve more ADUs, I think the $30,000 cap is too low to really, those are expensive. You know, you're looking at $100,000 projects or perhaps more. And we've heard from folks that that's one of the barriers is besides technical assistance and all the challenges, that it's much more expensive than taking an existing apartment that is offline because of code, and it's already got everything set up. But an ADU, you're creating a new bathroom, a new kitchen, a new entryway. It's expensive. So that would be an area I would focus on to make the parameters of S210 work better for ADU creation with this program.
Okay, I mean, just very briefly, there's always the house.
Right.
But that aside, let's talk about the substance of ADUs, because I think, at least I am, and I think a lot of committee members are interested in ADUs. And, you know, if you could use some help, however this pass in those guidelines on ADUs, I'm all in on that. But I continue to not understand why in promoting an ADU, it sounds like the administration is so insistent that we pay dollar for dollar the cost of the ADU. In the VHIP program, what is the matching requirement? We only give like 20% or 30%, right? And now it sounds to me like you're suggesting on the ADU that we give 100%.
No, I'm not suggesting that. The match requirement is 20%. It would stay 20% for ADUs. I'm just suggesting if you want people to create ADUs that are required to serve low-income people full-time, not turn them into short-term rentals, they're going to need more of an incentive to do that. And we should be paying, you know, even if it's $50,000, they're going to be matching that 100% in my view.
Okay, I didn't understand. That's great. Okay. Yeah, my idea is to give an incentive, but have them have a lot of skin in the game, and all the peripheral stuff, design, permitting, all that stuff, make it easy beans for them to do it. And but have them put some money in it, because this is going to be a winner for them too, probably.
Absolutely. The one project I know I was kind of heavily involved in trying to problem solve with VHIP early on was someone wanted to take their carriage house in the back of they had an apartment, you know, they lived in one, they rented the other, and they had an empty carriage house in the back that they wanted to turn into an ADU or perhaps two, and they wanted to use VHIP to help. But I mean, the costs were hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it just wasn't going to work, our $30,000 grant. And then we had time constraints and contractors, and so they dropped the project. But there's those opportunities out there, and I think if we could raise the grant on those to maximum of 50,000, keep a minimum 20% match, but it's going to be much more when you look at the true costs, and have the condition that they serve low-income people, and these aren't going to be short-term rentals. That's the benefit you're getting by incentivizing what we want with the condition. We're getting to control who gets to live there, which is what we want, I think.
Right. And so just to think ahead, it probably wouldn't be your preference, but if we differentiate the cap for ADUs versus renovation, would that still be progress? So, like, say, go to 50,000 for ADUs, but keep it at 30,000 for the renovations?
That would be progress. I think that unfortunately we're in this crazy time of inflation and costs rising. You know, I wish I could tell you the exact number. I mean, you know, maybe the regular should go to 40 and this should go to 50 or 60. I wish I could tell you exactly, but I would think that any increase on either side would be helpful. You know, we got below 30,000 with the first round. I don't know what the numbers are yet for this second round. I have a feeling costs are creeping up across the board.
Okay, thank you. So
yeah, the average on the first round was somewhere just over 23,000, as I recall.
Just under 24,000. Yeah.
Okay. So getting back to the question of our version versus Senate appropriations, I was, I'm having, I'm not having a lot of buy-in, to be quite frankly, that the reason to put all the money, the full $20 million in this year's budget or even into FY23's budget is the nonprofits need to plan for their hiring or firing. I mean, if we had to buy that argument for every single program in state government, we'd be funding a budget that would be a 3-year budget every year for every
Right.
program. So we heard your testimony, and we heard Sean's testimony, said, well, they want $20 million, and they admittedly say that's a 2-year or 3-year appropriation. So let's give them what they need for next year, and we'll still be able to revisit, still a relatively new program, we'll be able to revisit it. It's not that we don't want to fund the full amount, we just want to space it out. So I don't know if you want to respond.
Yeah, let me give you an example. With the 5 million that we have obligated to them now, because they ran out of the 7.2, we divided up against 5 organizations. They're getting less than $1 million, and their admin is a small percentage of that. And they're looking a year ahead and saying, I don't know if I can pay this person's salary and commit to a full year if I don't know more money's coming. That's a reality, that to stop and start a program and plan ahead and work with hundreds of landlords that are knocking on their door and have staff committed to helping them now, expecting money next year without knowing that they're going to receive appropriate administrative costs to be covered, is just a position that's digging them a deeper hole. I mean, some of them will tell you they actually lost money on the program because we tried to be very efficient with the money going out and not spending a dime more than we needed to on overhead costs. And so it's a challenge for them to plan and stop and start in cycles of barely enough money to, say $100,000 to run the whole program. And it involves multiple staff to do it. And so they're looking for insurances now to staff up and be prepared to do this long term and really bring on the 500 units we want. And they're scared of this political spot that they're stuck in the middle of, and they just don't want to be in the middle of it. I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but that's just, it's hard to quantify. But I think that there's $150 million that went to housing for, multifamily to VHCB, another 100 million this year that's had no concerns. Those larger development groups, they know what's coming. They're all set. This is working with one-off apartment owners all over the state that has very hands-on. You have to have a construction manager, a project manager. They got to visit the site. They got to document it. They got to hold the money in escrow. And it's just not the same. They're not getting a development fee of 15% on a $4 million multifamily development project. They're running on bare bones. And so I worry about, we don't actually do this program. They do it. And so we have to bring them along and have them feel confident that this is continuing to meet the success out there. And uncertainty is the challenge they're expressing to me. That makes sense.
It makes sense, but it would be a great argument, as Michael says, for everybody in state government. I mean, so many programs want those assurances. Every one of our designated agencies would like those assurances. I mean, it's so, but I understand, housing is one of our top priorities. I get that we want to signal that more is coming and that we're only going to be expanding these opportunities. So I get that we want to signal that. And we enabled that, we thought, in large measure in 210. And if we all accept the appropriations amendment, it'll be even further underscored.
And I guess to switch to that, because I do have to hop off here in 2 minutes. The 210 houses now, I think, there's been communication about, that the governor's appreciative that you moved some towards his veto. But it's not there yet. There isn't certainty that this is going to be met with approval. I think one other element that is very important to the governor is the missing middle homeownership development. I can't go a day without a nurse or a teacher, someone saying, I can't find a home to buy in Vermont. I make a good salary and it's just not existent. What are you doing, state? You know, I had an email last night from a couple that moved, that expressed how disappointed they were to us a year ago. They've now moved to North Carolina, built a house for $240,000, brand new, had a permit for $600 in one day, and are saying, see, this is what we're doing to Vermonters. We need to build missing middle stock. So that is very important to the governor. That perhaps is a way to get over the finish line in this bill. I don't know if there's time to do that, you know, to understand the parameters. I think once again, you'll hear from Maura about her agency's, you know, that runs $36 million a year of federal funds to do housing development without the parameters, you know, dictated through a process like this. It goes through a different process that meets the needs of the market and makes sure the programs are successful. So I think that's an area that we should talk a lot more about.
So some of these numbers like come out of, you know, their guesstimates, to put it gently, but if a compromise between Senate appropriation and our committee was to say, okay, you could have, I don't know if this is doable, you can have the $20 million, but we want it to last for 2 years. We don't want it to be, that's what you're telling us you need it for, but we don't want you spending the $20 million next year and then coming back for $20 million more the following year. That's the beauty of appropriating year to year. You have some control over it. But the way this is set up, the way appropriations has done it, is that it's, you know, there's discretion, I guess, as to how quickly, and that has its own beauties to it. But, you know, it just seems like we're rushing this.
Senator,
we have to go. We gave you enough money to get through this year.
Yeah.
We gave you enough money to get through next year, and that's still not enough.
Well, Senator, let me just real quickly. The number for VHIP and the ARPA expenditure was based on a plan to try to address the homeless problem with all our partners. How many units could we build over this 4 years? It was very much done with VHCB, VHFA, all the AHS. VHIP units are counted on bringing on 800 units to address the problem with the money we have. It's the most efficient way. They've already baked it into how we're going to transition people. We've already delivered 251 units, another 150 coming online. It's not, it's planned to spend over this period to address the crisis. It wasn't dreamed up, and we don't want to rush through it because we frankly can't do it all in 1 year, but it's part of a bigger plan to bring on 2,000 or more units over this period with all these numbers working together. So I understand what you're saying. It's not a open the door, spend it all. And, you know, it was targeted to try to address the needs. Happy to chat more. Thanks for hearing me this morning. And sorry, I have to go.
Good luck. And we are going to talk about missing middle this morning.
Okay. And we do need to just chat about revolving loan fund because that money is sitting there, but it's
real quick that so because you already passed the money to start VHIP basically with the CRF money, and those rules were in place when S79 was vetoed and it was general fund, we did not feel we had the same authority to move forward on that program. It's not that we don't. That program is critical. I think it connects CTE training and helping rehab and purchase homes that are derelict and provide them to first generation home buyers. I mean, it is, you know, the governor has
a missing piece too, the revolving loan fund.
Absolutely. But it's also more of a using our existing housing stock, getting folks that are in the trades to focus on that, purchase, revolve it. But it's at $1 million a year of general fund. It is not as much of the supply side increase in homes. Think about how many that can do. If you're buying one for $150,000, $160,000, you're sinking $100,000 of reinvestment in it. It's not that many homes per year. That's why we need another production side missing middle. But it is key, and it is has multiple benefits to do that program. But we didn't have the guidance to launch it.
Right. And that money is sitting, though. You have that money. So that money is sitting in escrow
Assuming
somewhere.
we can carry it forward into next year. There's $1 million that's targeted for this sitting, that if we get approval to carry it forward, that's what we would do.
Okay. Let's let Josh go and wish him luck wherever he's going.
Yeah.
So
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
thank you. Yeah.
Drive
Thank you.
safely.
Yeah. Gotta get the car out first.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna return to this at the end of the morning with more to understand better what's being suggested on the missing middle. I do have some concerns in terms of certainly the perpetual affordability or that element of the strings on that program. Anyhow, we're going to move now to minimum wage and paid leave, and we have the commissioner. We asked the commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation to be with us. If I recall, Commissioner, you are the point person on the governor's plan for state employees and beyond. When that was rejected by, well, I think it sort of went forward and to some level, but we moved on to a more universal program, which was vetoed, and the override failed by 1 vote. So there's clearly some interest in the legislature to do something in this area. And for my dime, I think the whole COVID thing and where we are now with Omicron, with people going in and out, with, having to isolate and quarantine and lose income, and we don't have any income replacement for these things, highlights the need for some sort of paid leave. We have a minimal paid sick day law in Vermont, but we're hearing that some people are really hurting. So I'd like to know where the administration is on the concept of paid family leave. And even if you're nowhere, I'd like to get a refresher course on what you had proposed in the past.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Sorokin, and good morning to the committee. And I asked Commissioner Fastidge to join me as well, because we were both the point people, I think, previously. So, and the commissioner is very familiar in terms of where the previous RFP went and where we are right now with an RFI that was issued just in the last 10 days or so, I believe. So the commissioner can speak to that, but maybe I'll just address some of the points that you raised and lay out some of the history here, because I needed to do my own refresher, because you're right, Senator Sorokin, that much of this conversation happened before COVID. And then when COVID hit, all of that sort of took a back burner in terms of the policy development. But, I think, as you stated, I think all the stakeholders were in agreement that paid family leave was critical prior to the pandemic. And, the pandemic has only highlighted that even more. My own experience when I contracted COVID before the holidays, I was able to continue to work because I was fortunately in a job where I can do that remotely, but obviously not everybody has that benefit or that privilege. So, that's just one example in how COVID has made that clear.
Well, and if I may, Michael, you're also salaried. So I think one of the key challenges is salaried, versus hourly.
Exactly. So I was fortunate I wasn't all that sick, so I could work. But if I couldn't work, exactly right. So if I couldn't, if I had to be in the office, I couldn't be in the office if I had COVID. But if I was too sick to work, I also couldn't work if I was hourly. Yeah. So the federal government stepped in during COVID and provided some degree of paid leave for parts of the pandemic. And then there was an interest in knowing what the federal government might do permanently with paid leave. That was in the Build Back Better bill that did not advance. They're talking about breaking it up into pieces. Hopefully paid leave will be one of those pieces. It would be good to have a nationally universal base, I think. Then states can respond to that and either leave it at the base or enhance it up, depending on what's passed at the federal level. But obviously that is an uncertainty. So just in terms of the Vermont history, a number of years ago, the Vermont and New Hampshire together announced a joint voluntary paid leave plan. I think it was in 2018, if my memory serves me correctly. And the concept was that there would be a base with state employees that both New Hampshire and Vermont would join into, allow businesses to join into that sort of pool, that base, to grow it. And then for those businesses that did not participate, for individuals to be able to participate in that pool separate from their employer. So that was the original plan. We went out with an RFI to get feedback from carriers about what would work, what wouldn't work, what aspects they might enhance. We went out right before COVID with an RFP to, we made some refinements and enhancements, went out with an RFP to try to see what proposals that might come in. And that was, I think, that was one of the last in-person meetings we had, Beth, if I can remember correctly, before COVID hit. So it really came right on the cusp of that. Since that time, New Hampshire has gone forward with a revised paid family leave plan of their own. It's a voluntary plan that is similar to what I just described, although there is some encouragement for private businesses to be participating, I believe, through some tax credits. And they've also tried to manage that individual pool in terms of the administration of it. But I think there's some details that they need to announce that I don't fully understand at this time, but they're planning to put out an RFP at the end of March for their plan. So that's a separate plan now. There's not a joint proposal at the moment for Vermont and New Hampshire. But I will turn over to Commissioner Festija, because there was advancement as it relates to state employees and bargaining. And that is partly what, the RFI that we put out recently was in connection with. So why don't I turn it over to Beth for that piece?
Good morning, Beth. Good morning. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. So with respect to the RFI that we just put out, we are hoping for proposals from insurance carriers in March, so that we can evaluate them and evaluate the proposals and get back to them and have some further conversations with them to help inform the RFP for the next steps. So we're looking for realistic timelines. We're looking at staged, the potential to stage in first the state employees, then adding the business community, then individuals on a staged basis. I think that in the past couple of years, there's been more experience in the insurance industry because of other states implementing their paid family leave programs. So a lot more infrastructure in the industry, as well as experience, so that we're hoping that we can get interest as well as guidance and understanding how we might better frame that RFP. We did bargain with our unions in the last cycle that if the program is implemented, it will be no cost to state employees. So that's, it would actually be, at this time, it would be a new collective bargaining cycle. The current contract with our state employees expires, the contracts expire at the end of June.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
that? I may have this wrong. My recollection is the last round, when the governor proposed this, he offered this benefit 6 weeks or something at no charge to the employees, but somehow in the process, the employees negotiated that if it didn't go forward, they would get an across-the-board small pay increase in lieu of that. And my understanding is, for that round, it was declared that the program hadn't got forward and they got their pay increase. So are they getting their pay increase and now they're getting the benefit as well going forward if the governor plans? Do I have that all mixed up?
You have it mostly right, actually.
Yeah.
The mostly right is that is part of it. If we fail to implement the program, then they would get a small increase basically on what the program would cost, but there's no timeline for implementation. So we still intend to implement it. We haven't implemented it yet. So And the other reasoning behind that was if we implemented it and if we took it away and it went away because there was some other program that they were required to buy into, a state program, that they would be kind of held harmless for that. So we're still, so until we either implement it and take away, or we decide we're not going to do it, which isn't the decision, we are still pushing forward and trying to make this happen. Just the issue of COVID kind of got in the way of implementation, but we still are on the path to provide this to our employees.
Obviously, we're not unaware that the governor is an important player in anything that goes forward. So I'm encouraged that he still believes in the idea and wants to move forward with it. And maybe there's a platform we could add to or build or tweak, but we should get to the heart of it. And we've discussed this frankly in our committee, is that the voluntary nature of the program for Vermonters, other than the state employees who are being given into free, is an opt-in scenario that we felt pretty strongly won't work. I don't know if you have more hope than we did, and I don't know if you have any experience elsewhere that shows that it will work, or if you have any other ideas for incentives to how to change the odds of it working or not. Senator Brock? Yes.
Just add, Mr. Chair, regarding the statement that we did not believe that it would work does not mean that a majority of this committee believed that.
You know, I'm going to put a standard clause in everything I say that applies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so Senator Sorokin, we were able to catch up with the governor's team earlier this week, and the governor still is opposed to a mandate, is still in favor of a voluntary program. So, that's sort of nothing, I guess, has changed from that perspective or that front. But to your question about are there examples, really the only example that is out there is New Hampshire. They are a little bit ahead of us in terms of the fact they got enacting or enabling legislation. I guess it would have been in the spring of last year that enabled them to then issue this RFP at the end of March. So they're a little bit ahead of us, but they're the only state that's done a voluntary program. And they addressed, some of the concerns that we heard from industry about, participation in the program, both from businesses and from individuals. On the businesses front, it was how do you get great participation or greater participation? And they have some, like I said, I believe they have some tax credits that encourage the businesses to participate. And then on the individual front, the biggest point of feedback was how do you administer it? Because insurance companies, obviously you buy your auto insurance through an individual basis, you do that, but through these kind of employment-based benefits, that's usually done from an employer to an insurance company. And the employer has a lot of information about the employee and can provide it in a systematic way that eases the administration of the benefit. So to have that kind of benefit provided through an individual was some question around how would that administration work. So New Hampshire is, like I said, they have not put out details about how they're going to address that, but they understand that was one of the points of feedback, and they're going to need to incorporate that into their plan as well. So we're kind of just personally anxious. I'm interested to see how they address that.
We don't have any example of the tension of whether an opt-in or an opt-out program draws enough people yet. I mean, New Hampshire's still pushing forward with the idea, but they haven't implemented it yet. So we don't have any, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks. The word mandating and voluntary is very interesting to me because you're basically mandating state employees to be in it, and that's mandating the Vermont taxpayers to pay for it. So, and then so to me, it's a mandate to the taxpayers. it may not, which is a hurdle. I'm having a hard time talking about the difference between mandating and voluntary, because actually you are mandating somebody to pay for it.
Yeah, so I think it's a good point, Senator Clarkson. I think what I can remember during the discussion was that, the governor's position was, as an employer, the state of Vermont is in a position to pay for this benefit and pay for it completely. And his concern was that some employers might not be in a position to afford the benefit, and that's why he wanted to make it voluntary, so that employers could decide whether they could opt into this pool or not. And then those employers that didn't, that did not participate, that their employees had the universal availability. So I think that was the concern. So you make a good point. Obviously, it's taxpayers that pay for all of this.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting is that's a big enough value, a common enough good, that he feels he can mandate that for the taxpayers. So I guess that I'm a little puzzled by the value difference here, because anyway, I think that's you've used up a common good for one group that you're actually asking the taxpayers to pay for, and yet you're leaving it to someone else, to an individual market to make that decision, when you've made that decision for a common good for 8,000 people.
I would like to just add to that a little bit. The reason that we felt like it was so important for this program to have state employees in there was to have that be the base to set up the market for Vermont. So in it itself, I mean, our employees have a very generous benefit package, and it might not be the primary next benefit that we might negotiate with our labor partners. We have our leave programs are very robust. They're different than you might see in the private sector. They're kind of antiquated in some ways. So I would see this as a primary benefit for newer employees that hadn't accumulated as much leave time as the more tenured employee in our environment. They accumulate benefits as we go. And actually with our sick leave benefit, it doesn't ever go away unless you use it. So you don't carry it over in retirement, but you could have a lot of sick leave left. And because of the way our benefits are already structured, this is actually pretty low cost. Be pretty low cost insurance option for us to buy into. Many employees might not, even if they had the need for themselves to go out, or be out due to a family member, or be out to bond with a child. Many employees that are more tenured have that time already, so they would unlikely use this benefit, because this benefit isn't full pay. So I think that as an incremental cost for our employees is actually quite low.
Right. Yeah, I can appreciate that. The interplay of the sick days versus paid family leave. And many of them have a more value already built in sick days.
Right.
And there's also disability insurance that they have for their own illness.
But we don't actually, we have a long-term disability insurance, but for only, not for our bargain for workforce.
Okay.
We don't, ours is not an insurance model.
Okay.
I would actually like to move to an insurance model, but that's all to work out with with our labor partners.
Well, could you just clarify that, Beth, for us?
Senator Brock? Senator Brock.
Oh, sorry, Randy.
Thank you. I would just like to add to the discussion about the differentiation between paid family leave as a benefit. And among the reasons that we discussed last year in listening to some of the objections to it, one of the principal objections is that paid family leave, as it was designed as a benefit model that we would be voting on, was based on charging thousands of Vermonters to pay into a system for which they would not be able to benefit. And the advantage that we discussed regarding a voluntary leave program, adding on to the state employee program that we're talking about now, is that only the people who want it would get it.
Right. And that's I mean, that's the crux of the issue here is, are you going to get the necessary participation to keep the program afloat? You can't, as I'm sure the commissioner will say, you can't have a insurance model where there's not a lot of interest in paying in, and you start getting into adverse selection if you say only the people who want it can pay it, because a lot of those people will be the ones that know they're going to use it, and you're not going to get the premium flow you need to sustain the program. Commissioner, I would be interested in if you could get us some more detail on what New Hampshire is doing. You made some comment that there may be some tax credits to
Yeah, for sure.
employers who buy into the program, and how it sounds like they're attempting to get at this tension point here, to try and make sure that there's a lot of participation in the program, so the costs can be kept down as best as it's a low cost program, but it can quickly become a high cost program if you only have a few people participating in it. So yeah, I think that's one of the things we need to. Yeah, and while we have you here, one of the tensions we've felt, and I'm sure you've heard about, I'd like for you to comment on. I, for one, didn't have as much problem with this. With the governor's proposal, he wanted to farm it out to the insurance industry. And I know a bunch in the advocate community felt uncomfortable with that. And putting the sandbox aside, I think insurance companies might be able to handle this.
Yeah, so that part of it, you're right. And that was another component of the governor's plan. And there were arguments that were made for it that I think were compelling. There were concerns that we heard that are always compelling. The arguments for it, were that, insurance company already has reserves and an asset base, and they could offer the benefit without sort of a period of time where you're requiring taxpayers to pay into a new trust fund without the benefit being available. So the trust fund gets established and then eventually the benefit gets paid out. So hopefully you avoid that sort of startup period because you're using this, or you should. The point is to avoid that startup period because you have a established company that already has those reserves and financial base. The other point was, it was somewhat based off New York State. So New York State doesn't have a single carrier that mandates, but they say you have to get this level of paid family leave, and then there's a bunch of, at the time we last looked at it, there were like 27 or 28 carriers that you could select from to purchase your insurance. So they didn't establish a large organization to do this within state government. They relied on the insurance industry. And then we looked at a few other states that were implementing paid family leave through their state program, so that should be state administered. And it seemed rather expensive to build that out in terms of a state program. So that was, those were sort of the reasons that it seemed like, this is an industry that's well equipped at handling this, and they might be able to do it quicker and more effectively. Now, on the other side, what we heard from individuals, because insurance companies aren't the most beloved businesses in the economy, there were concerns that there would be denials that were inappropriate, and there would be bureaucracy that would prevent people from getting the benefits. So certainly that's always a concern of a consumer, but you would have to just build in protections for consumers to make sure that didn't happen in the first instance, that there was oversight and review. And that's the role that our department always plays in insurance, but also that there's an appeal process that can be heard quickly in the event that there's something that is done that the consumer thinks is adverse or the wrong decision. So I think that's sort of the general, I think, discussion about, the benefits and concerns around using a private insurance company. Beth, I don't know if there's anything I left out there.
Oh, that's a good refresher. Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add would be also to administer that individual market for the state to set up the infrastructure for that would be quite costly, where a third party administrator administering potentially small businesses, but an individual market makes a lot more sense. They already have the IT infrastructure to do that work. So where we don't.
Okay. So this is helpful to refresh our memory and where we go. I don't know if either of you could get back to us with any ideas you might have how to bridge this divide between on participation rates. I think the administration can be resolved. The specifics of the program as a starting program can get involved. I mean, I think I do. I think well, no, I won't say this entirety of this committee, but a lot of members of our committee feel that we'd like to do, this is a need that should be addressed. And if there's a compromise way of addressing it, it would be helpful. And, in a day of ARPA funding where there's a lot of money, it's disappearing quickly, but there's a money for the next 4 years that are out there that can be used as a carrot or something to get the program up and running. That might be one thing to look at. But I for one have always felt like it should be a shared responsibility between employees and employers. But the bill that even passed the legislature had it all being funded by the employees. But and I think that was another impediment to getting full participation under the governor's plan. So, I mean, it's one thing to get 100% of the state employees when the administration's paying for it. It's another to get 100% of the employees when everybody has to, and I readily admit, have to dig into their own pocket to pay for something like this. So that's the problem. And I'd be interested if there are creative ideas, maybe looking at ARPA funding or something like that, that could give us a little more comfort that we won't launch a program that will quickly fizzle and we've wasted 4 more years waiting for people to sign up. And so there you have it. I hope I'm clear what we're looking for. So,
Yeah, no, that's clear, Senator. We can get you the committee information around the revisions to the New Hampshire program, and then also we'll take the conversation back and think about where there might be ways that we can reach an agreement or middle ground.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
I know I'm going to get a note from Scott that we're about to take a break, but actually I'd like to plow ahead for like 10 or 15 more minutes on minimum wage because we're behind schedule, and then we'll take a break, and we have Joyce and Matt here to talk about minimum wage. We heard quite a bit from Matt about minimum wage already, at least on a theoretical front. And so I want to move to Joyce, and I asked her to prepare some numbers as to what we would be looking at if we at one point the Senate passed a bill that raised the minimum wage to $15, and by 2020, I think at one point it was 2024, then it got delayed as 2025. But I asked her to look at those parameters and run numbers similar to the numbers we used when we just went through to 22, excuse me. Wow, I'm a decade off. So good morning, Joyce.
Good morning, Senator. Good morning, committee. Yes, I have a nice hand. Yes, it's nice to see everyone. I'm Joyce Manchester from the Joint Fiscal Office, for the record. I have a handout that you should
Is
be
it-
able to
is it-
access.
Is it posted, Scott?
Yes,
Great.
Can we share the screen? Is that possible, Joyce?
I'm happy to share the screen, sure.
Oh, the plows. I'm hearing cleanup starting here.
There, you should be able to see my table, which is in our new JFO colors. We're trying to brand all of our documents. So we have our
Yes,
nice blue and
We
green
have,
colors.
we've noticed.
Indeed. So here I just put together the usual table that first shows the current law as path A, and secondly shows S52, the proposed change in the minimum wage, as path B. I'd like to start over on the left-hand side of the table to say that I'm showing you the historical and consensus CPI inflation rates year by year from 2016 out to 2030. And you'll see that things have changed from a year or two ago. We've had a bout of inflation, and we expect inflation to stay a little bit higher than has been the case historically for the next few years. So you can see in dark bold print there, the historical rates, which went as high as 4.7% for the year 2021. Now, some of you have heard that inflation was advertised as 7%. It really depends on the time period that you're looking at. So the 4.7% is averaged over the year 2021. The 7% that you heard about in the press was specifically from December of 2020 to December of 2021. So that's a specific 12-month period, which is different from what we use for thinking about inflation over a year, which is the average inflation rate over the year. So beyond 2021, I'm using the consensus forecast, which was released by Tom Cavett and Jeff Carr in January of this year. So they see 2022 inflation at 4.2% and slowly dropping down to 2.2% by the end of the decade. So those are slightly different from what you've seen before. So here we have current law, and right now in 2022, we are at $12.55 an hour. That minimum wage will adjust going forward by the rate of inflation as long as it's no higher than 5%. If it's higher than 5%, it would only grow at 5%. So you can see we have slow increases in line with inflation in the coming years. In the adjusted for inflation column, I've knocked down the nominal value, the current dollar value, by inflation. So you can see as long as we're indexing to inflation, we're staying at $12.55 in terms of today's dollars. Now we'll move to the right to path B, and this is S52 as proposed. So you can see we're at $12.55 again in 2022. We move up to $13.35 in 2023, $14.15, and then $15 an hour in 2025. I've shown you the actual increase in that proposed minimum wage path, 6.4%, 6.0% for 2 years. And I've shown you in real dollars, in 2022 dollars going forward, that the $12.55 today would grow to $13.77 by 2025 at $15 at that time in those dollars, in the future dollars. And then index to inflation beyond that. So slowly bumping up a little bit beyond that. Are there any questions about the table?
I don't think so. The next table that we would be looking for is to do using these same figures to try and, I don't know if you have thought about this, to see, kind of get the number of people impacted, projected in the workforce by these numbers. I think we had that from both the department and from you last time around. There was some difference, but not a lot, I think.
So I should warn you that we have very little data about contemporaneous wages. And the story from the street is that many low-income wage earners have seen an increase in their wages. In fact, as of December, there was some good evidence showing that low-wage workers are seeing faster wage increases than middle and higher wage earners. And that's because there's such a shortage at the low end. So the most recent data we have for workers statewide in terms of wages earned comes from 2020. It comes from the Occupational Employment Survey. And that's simply not relevant anymore because the labor market is so different now in 2022. So you're certainly welcome to talk to Matt Barowitz about this. I've had a little chat with him myself, and it's really impossible to get good data on the distribution of wages and how many people are at what levels of wages today, because things have changed so much.
When would new numbers be available that might give us more information?
So he indicated that the 2021 numbers would be available in a few months. So that might be end of April or May. But that's still 2021. That's not 2022, right?
Is the problem, we'll ask Matt this question as well, is the problem we're facing is what we know anecdotally or by signs on the street? You know, everybody's saying paying $15 an hour, entry wage, something. Is the problem, I'm trying to understand the differentiation here versus, didn't we have the same challenges back last time around when we made projections, except these are different times, these are so unusual that it really makes it harder at this point, and we have to perhaps rely upon some other assumptions or guesstimates.
Yes, I think you hit it on the head at the end of your statement there. So I think in the past, if you had data that was a year or two old, it wasn't expected to be out of line with what's going on today when labor markets were more stable. And the problem is that today we have such upheaval and resignations and changes in people's plans about how they work and where they work and how much they work. Things have really changed relative to a year or two ago.
Right.
Okay. So I guess in terms of pondering going forward, I don't want to be, I hope there's some suggestion maybe out there that I don't want to be totally hamstrung in terms of saying we can't do policy because the data is not there. And even though we have a feeling that we should be doing some, talking for myself, we should be doing something in this area, we're stuck because we don't have the data to do it. I mean, are there ways that this can be approached where we can do it and double check our work sort of after the implementation and tweak it as we go along? I mean, it's somewhat of a rhetorical question. I know the legislature can do whatever it wants and can find ways, but we want to do it in a way that's, you know, somewhat comfortable, not totally a crapshoot. So.
Sure. So I would say that the statewide data won't be terribly helpful, but certainly talking to representatives out there in the field. So maybe the retail associations and so forth would be able to give you a very good contemporaneous idea of what's happening to wages at the low end. Certainly healthcare, retail workers, what else? You know, you can come up with a list, but they would certainly know what's going on.
Do you know anything about, I remember, I'll get to you in a second, Senator Clarkson. Do you know anything, I remember in the House, minimum wage faced problems primarily because of direct personal caregivers were claiming that they couldn't afford to pay the minimum wage unless they got increases in the Medicaid reimbursement rate. Do you have a feel, or could you ask around what we've done in the Medicaid reimbursement rate for those folks? And if we raise the minimum wage here, even in the interim to $15, whether they they have the same problem they had before, or whether their wages have gone up on the street already.
Yeah, I'll have to ask around about that, Senator. So I do know that there has been some hazard pay and some one-time payments and so forth to bolster the wages of some of those healthcare workers. I don't think that affects the Medicaid reimbursement rate, but I'll ask around and try to find out more about that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anybody have Senator Clarkson for Joyce? Yes.
Yes, Joyce, sorry. I actually do have a question about this chart. And I know I'm not an economist and you're a whiz, but I don't get what the numbers, the adjusted, and forgive my ignorance, but what does the impact of the adjusted for inflation numbers have to do with, I mean, how does that impact our decision about raising the minimum wage or not? Help explain that to me. Forgive me. So the 1255 versus 1393 and 10/20/30, when in fact the minimum wage would be $17 an hour and or 15.62 an hour.
Sure. So the question is, how much will $17 an hour buy in 2030?
So it will buy the equivalent of 13.93 today.
Exactly.
And so it will still have more buying power, is what
Absolutely.
You're saying.
Correct.
Okay, great. I thank you. Sorry, then.
No
I
problem.
don't have the ability when we're on Zoom to ask you that in a corner, so I don't,
It's fine.
And so you said, Joyce, you said you had, I'm going to switch over to Matt. Thank you very much. But you say you have had some conversations with Matt, and I am curious as to how you guys work together in terms of producing your own charts, which are, I guess, independent of each other, but you pretty much rely upon the data from Matt's shop and have different assumptions perhaps than they may have. Is that correct?
Yes, and in fact, he and I have not talked about minimum wage specifically. We were talking about the prevailing wage and data that is relevant to the prevailing wage, but that same set of data is relevant to thinking about what people in the economy are being paid overall. So yeah, it was in that context that we've been talking.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Joyce. We'll
I
definitely
have a question, Chair.
Absolutely, Senator Brock. Go ahead.
Just a question for Joyce, and we corresponded a little bit on this subject in the last day or two. Is it a fair statement that it is likely that many of the lower paying jobs have had substantial or at least significant increases in pay during the COVID emergency and the aftermath, principally because, at least in Vermont, the demographic problems we have in getting workers into the workforce?
Yes, it's very clear that there's a shortage of workers in Vermont at the current time, in part because of our demographics and in part because of the ongoing COVID emergency. But it appears to be the case from anecdotal evidence that is especially true in the low wage market. And so businesses are having to increase the wages that they offer in order to get folks to work at lower paying jobs.
And have we seen, just on the basis of advertising in particular, particularly with larger employers of lower wage workers, that in fact is something that's happening, and indeed in some cases pushing the $15 an hour minimum wage out the window because people are getting $15 an hour? I'm thinking of places like Walmart and to some extent, to a lesser extent, McDonald's.
Yes, so you've probably seen the same signs that I've seen in the windows that advertise starting wages at $15 or more. The problem is that we don't have a representative statewide survey of wages to know if most businesses are now starting at 15 or if it's only the more visible ones that are starting at 15. So that's the problem in not having a statewide wage survey that's current.
One of the concerns I have, because I drive through McDonald's quite frequently here in Albans, and I see that they're offering a $700 weekly wage coupled with a 401k and education benefits and a number of other things. And I sort of compare that, that I may leave the legislature to go work for McDonald's because I probably would get a pay increase.
You probably would.
Just an observation.
Yes, yeah, good one. Senator
Ma-
Clark.
Joyce, to this sort of concern, I mean, I know there are people that are concerned that because of the labor shortage at the moment and inflation, minimum wage now is up, but there's nothing in law that keeps it up. So, I mean, it is after periods of inflation, have we seen wages go down again? I mean, without a statutory foundation, isn't it possible that wages could slide right back down?
So the current minimum wage law says that the minimum wage in Vermont is indexed to inflation. So as inflation rises, so too does the minimum wage. And I believe, Damien can correct me if I'm incorrect here, I believe that there is a provision that says that the minimum wage cannot decline even if prices decline.
Right.
So-
No, I get that because that's statutory. My point is that even right now, our minimum wage is at $12.55. So to Randy's point, most lower wage jobs are now being paid quite a bit more. What is keeping this is all about whether or not we raise the minimum wage statutorily to $15 an hour. What is keeping, if inflation disappeared tomorrow, what's keeping employers from not just offering $12.55 again? Nothing.
No, that's true, but they have to respond to the market. And if they still experience a shortage of lower wage workers, they would want to offer a wage such that they're able to hire. So it's at some point above the minimum wage, it's up to the market to decide what happens to wages.
Can I ask a question?
Senator Rahm.
Joyce, you alluded to the fact that we don't necessarily have a statewide wage survey, and we have some information, but it may all be national, about low wage and minimum wage workers often being women, and particularly older women. And I just raised that to see if we have some of that information. And when, as a kind of response to Senator Brock's point, yes, a lot of institutions that receive a lot of scrutiny or are larger corporations or, have people in their workforce who have institutional power, they're more likely to meet that higher wage. But it's often older women and people who lack political and institutional power who have less ability to argue for a higher wage and need that wage standard to meet their cost of living.
Yes, I appreciate your point, Senator Rahm. So it is certainly the case that older women tend to be in jobs that are less visible, perhaps. And let's see, I would guess that their occupations are under as much labor strain, shall we say. So not enough workers to fill the jobs. And in fact, maybe even more affected by the labor shortage these days because they may be more affected by the COVID pandemic. They may not feel that they're able to work because they have to be in person. They may be taking care of other family members and so forth. So I simply don't know of any data in Vermont that would tell us now what's happening to the wages of older women, for example, or those who are most likely to be paid the minimum wage. I wish we had better data, but I don't know of any.
Okay, so thank you for the question. So one of the things I wanted to say, Senator Clarkson, I think you were getting at the point that I've made, I think, a couple of times as to why I wanted to revisit the minimum wage, and hopefully it wouldn't be as controversial as it has been in the past, is to preserve the impact of the inflationary increase we have in law.
Exactly.
So now as we know in the marketplace, a lot of jobs are already paying $13.50 or $14 and $15. If we don't do something here, we're going to get every inflationary factor we have in the future, in the near future, is going to have very minimal effect. It's not going to be increasing the minimum wage other than in law. It's not going to impact people in their pocketbooks going forward at that level because they're already being paid more than that. So the idea here is just to get us to $15, and then when the inflation factor comes in, it may have some meaning to people who are working in minimum wage jobs. So that was my primary focus in this.
Right.
But we have Matt. We'll hear from Matt briefly. We're way behind schedule here today. I apologize for that. But I would like Matt, welcome. I guess the same question is, in the absence of current data, especially in this job market, what can we do to, I know it's going to be much more risky, but is there any other place to look for information?
Good morning. For the record, I'm Matthew Bearwitz. I'm the Economic and Labor Market Information Division Director for the Vermont Department of Labor. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I think where I just want to start is just to kind of iterate. We've talked to several people from the state today, but akin to Joyce at Joyce Manchester Joint Fiscal Office, who you just heard from, I'm a state employee and consider myself a servant to the state. So I'm not part of the administration. I'm here as my role as an economist. And though I'm a state employee, I'm 100% federally funded by my federal partners at the U.S. Department of Labor, who pay my division to collect, compile, and release economic data consistent with federal methodology. And so if your question is what information is available that would help you make decisions, I think during our last brief conversation about the minimum wage, we did talk about how you're interested in looking at potentially the occupational breakdown by wages. This is the data that Joyce referenced that is from 2020, but we can at least compare it and look at it to identify which occupations are the ones that would be most susceptible to any increases in the minimum wage, and kind of discuss where those occupations might be located from an industry standpoint, and then from an industry standpoint, try and understand how those things happen. Because I think consistent with paid family leave discussion that you had earlier, there is the question of how does these increases in prices, which is what wages are, how do they get paid for? And I think there's a faulty assumption that the employer just absorbs these costs as a cost of doing business, when in fact the employer themselves is a pass-through, and it is ultimately the revenue of the businesses that makes up the price increases for wages or any input for the product or service that the company is delivering. So that would be my answer to your question.
I'm not sure I understand how that answers the question. I think what you just said is that we'll see price increases if we do this. I was asking, how do we get data that we would be able to rely upon, given the fact that we have an unusual economy and the data lags behind?
Right.
Okay. Well, I guess I misunderstood your question then. That's the function of data in itself. Data always lags behind. But the information we have available to us is quality in terms of what it represents for the state of Vermont. I think you could look at an ends game discussion if you are interested in discussing, what is the purpose of increasing the minimum wage and understanding what the target might be. Is it to lower poverty rate? Is it to reduce income inequality? Because I think some of our previous conversations would indicate that the research on that is quite scant as far as the relationship between increasing the minimum wage and reducing levels of poverty, increasing or decreasing the levels of income inequality. But those would be metrics if that's your target goal that you might want to start.
Matt, you keep coming back to why we shouldn't raise the minimum wage. I know that's your opinion, but that's not what you're here for. You're here to help us decide whether the numbers for me to understand the number of people that will be impacted. not whether prices are going to go up or whether we're going to address income inequality. Those are policy decisions for us. So I'm just trying to get some data from you, and you keep coming back to why we shouldn't raise the minimum wage. I don't think that's appropriate. I want to know, given this market, that things are so unusual that we can't in the norm look to data and just like the economists do, and they say, okay, inflation based on past experience is going to go up 2% in the future years. They make these projections. We realize we're in unusual times where, at least anecdotally, we see all these signs that say people are paying more. And Joyce has warned us that it's really the data is more to use the data is more suspect than usual because of COVID and whatever the climate is. And she said, well, you could go to individual industries and yada, yada, yada. That's one thing. And we can do that. What I'm trying to do, we did all these charts the last time of saying how many people are on minimum wage and what we project the cost will be in terms of paying a higher minimum wage. I'm sure you remember that because you wrote many of those charts. It sounds to me like it's really hard to do that in this climate. We can't say that, I can't remember whether it was $50 million in additional wages would be paid out to these people, because we're aware of the fact that many of these people we thought were at minimum wage are probably no longer at minimum wage. So I'm just asking you as a statistician or as a market information person to say, is there anything else we should be doing to try and get the best reliable data possible at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question, and I apologize to the committee if it was if my speed and brevity of response was interpreted as an opinion. You are 100% correct. I do not have an opinion on this. I saw my role as an economist just to explain the economic theory underneath this. I do not have an opinion on the public policy or the political theory behind any of this. And as it responded in my first answer to your question, looking at occupations and looking at the occupations across the Vermont economy, looking at them in terms of their wage distribution, not just the median and the mean, but also their 10th percentile or 25th percentile, would illuminate the discussion in terms of highlighting which occupations and their quantity would most likely be impacted by increases to the minimum wage. Yes, it would require assumptions to age that data from 2020 forward. But as you said, that's what, people who work in this arena do. They age data quite regularly. The margin of error would be greater at this time because when you're aging from 2020 to 2022, the variability is probably greater in terms of the room for error than if you were aging data from 2015 to 2017. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify my initial response. And again, apologize deeply to the committee if it was interpreted that I was given an opinion, which I don't have on that.
Okay, thank you. So can you look at some of the charts that you and Joint Fiscal provided to us in the bill that did pass, that went to 2022, 1255, wherever we are. Can you look at that and try and replicate those charts with whatever assumptions you put in there? I guess I'm looking to say, at least maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, that we had charts back then that said the added cost or the added wages that would happen, or $56 million over, I don't know if it was a 1-year period or a 2-year period. Can we do the same for this bill as we did for what we passed last time? And I realize that it's going to be riskier given what's going out in the real world, but you say you can make assumptions and you can project those numbers. So I'm just that's what I'm trying to get at, to get some charts like that.
Sure. My recollection is that it was actually Tom Cavett in partnership with the Joint Fiscal Office that produced a lot of those reports. And I did work with Tom on the back end to provide the raw data that ultimately informed him and his modeling. And I think he did come up with some estimates regarding either by industry or the total Vermont economy. I think he even got down to the level of like employment impacts and changes in income across the economy. But Tom Cavett, if memory serves me, I think those reports, and I can look through my historical files to see if I can put my hands on it, was the original author of that and should be given full credit for his work there.
You may be right. I actually thought that my recollection, I don't know if it was Tom or Joint Fiscal, but you're right. They produced some numbers, but I also thought the department had, I may be mixing this up with paid leave, but I thought the department also had some numbers. They weren't all that far off, but there were some different assumptions. But all right, we'll get to that. I appreciate your time, and I'm sorry we're really running late. But that's where, we'll move back in touch and try and develop some charts like that. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Matt. And let's take, I don't see people. Does anybody have a question? But if they don't, I'd like to take a break till 10:40.
Randy's got a question.
Okay, sorry, Randy, go
I
ahead.
have hopefully a very brief question for Matt Barowitz, who was not here to be able to testify before us yesterday on the prevailing wage issue. And that question that I have is, I've looked at your charts for prevailing wages for the construction industry. And my question is regarding the 42% adder, which does not appear to be in those rates, as to whether or not that 42%, which is a Davis-Bacon rate, is based here in Vermont on anything that approximates accuracy. Do you have any sense for whether the benefit rates being paid in Vermont are in line with the 42% required by Davis-Bacon?
Matt, I'm gonna interrupt unless you can answer this question quickly. This is not coming up, Senator Brock, on the floor today, is my understanding. And
Coming up on the floor on Tuesday, and I'm got to go to appropriations at 1:15 today, which is why I'm asking the question now.
Go ahead. I just hope it's not a long answer. Go ahead.
No, I try and focus on brevity. My understanding of the 42.5% is more of like one of those things that came together as the form of public policy. At the time that it was passed, my research indicated that in the construction industry specifically, the average benefit package was anywhere from 9 to 11%. So that would be the brief answer.
Great. Thank you very much. That answers my question.
That's really weird. Okay. See, this is where we go. We start getting off on a topic we weren't on, but I want to extend that courtesy. But I've rarely heard of a benefit package being that low. I wish Beth Fastiggi was back with us. I can't imagine the state employees benefit package is 9%. But anyhow, let's go on to take our break. Now we'll come back at 10:45.